Happy New Year and welcome to Things You Shouldn't Do When Ordering Wines. Number 1 on the list is don't be intimidated by a long wine list. It's actually like being in a candy store where you're very likely to find something that you like, love, and might even be excited by. Once I take you through this, you're going to see how easy it is to segregate the wines that you don't like and eliminate them. Most wine lists are broken down by styles, grape varietals, regions, or a combination of these. When it comes to styles, they could be red, white, rosé, sparkling, dessert, or fortified. So if you're planning on having a red only or a white only, then you could very likely eliminate the rest of it. But if you're anything like me, then chances are you'll be swayed by the wind, especially if they've got a great selection of wines. When it comes to grape varietals and regions, look for what you're familiar with, like or dislike, and it'll be very easy to eliminate the grapes and regions that you're not interested in. By browsing through the price points of the wines that you're familiar with as well, you'll be able to determine how high the markup on these wines are and if it's actually worthwhile to pay the price. As an example, an entry-level non-vintage champagne from a decent champagne house in the state of Qatar would cost the equivalent of 350 euros or more in a restaurant. Now, I love wining and dining in such experiences, but I'm also a bargain hunter. In such cases, I'd much rather order a cava, which is great value for money, and pay a maximum of 20% of that price, although it'll probably be lesser, then go to the store and actually buy a vintage champagne. Then I can have my cake and eat it. Number 2, don't order the most expensive wine on the list. Just because something is expensive doesn't mean that it's the best in quality, taste, and definitely not value. I've mentioned before that there's a minimum price point that we'll have to pay for quality wines, but beyond that minimum price point and a few categories upwards in the name of quality, say in terms of raw materials and production methods, further increases in price does not have any significance on the quality of the wine, or if it does, it would just be marginal. Perhaps on its packaging and definitely its branding and premiumization, but not on the wine itself. As an example, a regular quality kilo of grapes would cost, say, $4, and there'll be some use of herbicides and pesticides, but it'll all conform with agricultural health and safety regulations. Say I then want to increase that level of quality and I only want to use organically grown grapes or those which are produced through stringent biodynamic practices, and I end up having to pay, say, 3 times the price of regular grapes. That would be $12 per kilo. Suppose I then want to increase this premiumization and quality up a further notch and I buy grapes that are grown in tiny quantities from a specific parcel of land, and I'm now paying $50 for a kilo of grapes. I make the wine and I sell it for $1,000 per bottle. Question is, has the quality of wine increased so significantly in comparison to the wine that was made from grapes that were $4 or $12 US? After all, it only takes 1 kilo of grapes to make a 750 milliliter bottle of wine. Let's not go to the extent of trying to make wines from ruby Roman grapes. And what's ruby Roman grapes, you might be asking? Only the most expensive grapes on the entire planet. According to Business Insider, in 2020, a single bunch of ruby Roman grapes sold for $12,000 US. We could have bought 2 bottles of Screaming Eagle plus change. So a single grape in that bunch cost $400. And you might be wondering, how big was that grape? And whilst there's no specific mention of it, the minimum requirement in terms of weight for a single ruby Roman berry is 20 grams. So if we do the math, that $12,000 bunch of grapes would have weighed around 600 grams or slightly more. And no, those are not the type of grapes that are made into wine, but then again, you never know. I've never heard of anyone trying to make them into wines. Number 3, don't go by expensive brands unless you actually know the brand, have tasted their wines and like them, or you trust the source that's recommended them to you. Scientists have found that when people are told that a wine is more expensive, their brain's reward center actually tricks their taste processing into believing that the wine tastes better than it actually is. And this is known as the placebo marketing effect. The Journal of Wine Economics published a report based on 6,000 blind tastings where they found that when people were unaware of wine price points, their enjoyment of expensive wines were actually tiny and in the negative end. So most of the test subjects actually preferred cheaper wines. And some key reasons for this is that when wines are made in bulk and are inexpensive, that is, they're mass produced, they tend to be made with higher residual sugars and in fruitier styles because these are actually what's most palatable to the average consumer. Who doesn't like fruitiness and sweetness? A small fragment of people. Interestingly enough, this result changed when they looked at a specific community of test subjects who were wine trained. And their conclusion of this: price points and expert wine recommendations are not necessarily good guides for your average consumer who are not wine trained. Number 4, don't take the sommelier or staff's recommendation if they haven't tried to establish your preferences and budget. If this happens, then be sure to make a counter offer by telling them what your preferences and budget are, and then ask them again if their recommendation stands. Their role is to make recommendations based on your needs and your pleasure, not theirs of what's popular, unless you've decided to leave it to their taste, say perhaps if you know of the staff and their experience levels. Number 5, don't underestimate the sommelier or wait staff's knowledge of the food and wines that they serve. They may not have extensive knowledge of wines from all around the world, but they do know, or at least they should know, what they're serving. Many finer dining restaurants, especially those with Michelin stars or endeavor to be at that level, would hold food and tasting sessions as part of their staff training. Think about it. It's a lot easier to recommend and sell things if you've tasted something and understand it rather than knowing it in theory. Number 6, and this is really important, don't accept the wine if the seal is broken, the foil or label is damaged. The service of wine is often misunderstood. There's always a reason for everything, even if it's merely historical today. When a bottle of wine is presented to you, it's so that you can confirm that it's the right wine and not just for show. Here are the main things that you're looking out for. 1, it's the right bottle of wine, including the vintage, if applicable. Many dining outlets would carry more than one wine from the same producer, and it's easy to mix things up if the wines are of the same style and if the labels look relatively similar. And if you find yourself in a situation where you didn't notice that it was the wrong wine until you're halfway through the bottle, still bring it up to the staff. They need to know that they made a mistake. And in your finer dining establishments, they most likely will offer you a change of wines, which you can accept or not, or at least a significant discount on the bottle that you have consumed. After all, it was primarily due to their staff's negligence. Secondly, that the wine has not been tampered with. A broken seal or damaged foil are red flags that the wine may not be what it's actually supposed to be. Whilst a damaged label, unless it's a pretty old wine, and when I say pretty old, I'm talking about 2 decades and more, could very well indicate that the wine was not stored properly and that the staff don't know what they're doing. You should never be served with a bottle that has a damaged label without a conversation first taking place, which would encompass an apology, a query as to whether you're willing to accept the wine with a damaged label, and in most circumstances, at a discounted price. There really is no reason for you to be served a wine with a damaged label unless That's the only bottle that's left and you simply insist on it. In all truths, the content of the bottle may not be affected at all depending on the degree of damage. The label could be stained, torn, wet, or whatever else. All of which are mostly attributable to human negligence, and like dented canned food, its contents are typically unaffected. If you really wanted the wine and you're now offered a discount for it because the label is damaged, or if you're not even offered a discount, but you really want it and you've inspected the rest of the bottle and it looks fine, then go for it. Number 7, don't start with wines that are sweeter, fuller in body and higher in alcohol content first. Just like how we start our meals with lighter courses, progressing on to heavier ones, similarly when it comes to wines. As an example, drinking a sweet wine followed immediately by a dry wine will only emphasize the dryness of the second wine. Unless, of course, you're pairing individual wines to the individual courses, then this may change. If you'd like to learn about factors that impact a wine's body, then do check out What Does the Body of a Wine Mean, which I'll leave a link to somewhere on the screen. Number 8, don't order sparkling wines by the glass without finding out how long the bottle has been open for, especially if the restaurant looks like a ghost town. In the event that you do and the sparkles are gone, then don't accept the wine. And you can prevent the situation by asking for them to bring the bottle to the table to pour it in front of you, or perhaps by going to the bar and asking to be served at the bar. So I've had this bottle open for about 2 days now. I don't think you can actually see, but there's slightly more than half of it left. And I've used a sparkling wine stopper for this. Let's see if we can hear anything. Oh, you heard that pop and that fizz. So, if your sparkling wine doesn't pour like this, no, don't take it. And if we look closely enough, you can see the continuous stream of slow and steady bubbles moving upwards. And this is what you want when you're ordering a glass of sparkling wine. You're not ordering a semi-sparkling wine, or as the Italians say, semi-frizzante. Number 9, don't be a stick in the mud and pair only seafood and chicken with whites and darker meats only with reds. In general, lighter to medium-bodied styled reds, especially those with higher acidity and lesser tannins, or softer ones at least, such as Beaujolais, Valpolicellas, Chiantis, Cabernet Francs, Pinot Noirs, and Tempranos, can pair really well with seafood depending on the individual wines and dishes. You'll be missing out on a lot of fun and pleasurable experiences if you're going to stick to myths that are not justified or outdated. If you'd like to learn about how food and wines interact with one another, then do check out Can Wine Pairings Be Easy Parts 1 and 2, which I'll leave links to somewhere on the screen. Number 10, don't order the cheapest wine unless you've asked the sommelier or staff if it's actually okay. Most restaurants would put at least decent wines as their least expensive, but you always want to be safe and make sure that you're not ending up with some rubbish. Sometimes it's better to pay that extra $5 to $10 and get something of quality than to be miserable with an awful wine. And here's our fun fact for today. If your wine server offers you the cork, unlike what you see in movies and sometimes these wannabe snooty videos, you're not meant to smell the cork because it's only going to smell like wet wood and corky. Traditionally, it was for the consumer to verify the authenticity of the wine by identifying the logo of the brand, which would be printed on the cork. Till today, a lot of brand owners still choose to have their logo, name, or some form of identification printed on the cork, but not always. So I lied, there are actually 2 fun facts over here. Mold on the outer side of the cork, that is the side that's not in contact with the wine, is perfectly normal and actually good because it means that the wine was stored in humid conditions. Now, wines simply love humidity and they need to be stored in such conditions, especially if they're meant to age. If for whatever reason you find mold on the other side of the cork, i.e. the moist side that has been in contact with the wine, which is highly unlikely, then be extra careful when you're tasting the wine or I'd actually recommend asking for a change of wines straight away. And that brings us to the end of things you shouldn't do when ordering wines. Do show your support by hitting the like and subscribe buttons if you haven't already done so, comment on this video and share it. And please do feel free to send me a private message if you have any questions or clarifications. Until next Saturday, here's to good health.